She had everything money could buy: a mansion, luxury, and a father who could move the world with a single call. But what she didn't have was time. Inside the glittering walls of the Whitmore Estate, a little girl was slowly dying, while the people sworn to save her were hiding a truth darker than death itself. When a quiet maid entered that house, she had no idea she was walking into a nightmare built on lies, greed, and betrayal. Yet one promise she made would expose everything. What she did next didn't just change girl's life. And when that truth came out, no one, neither the doctors, the staff, nor the billionaire himself, was ready for it. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. Alexander Whitmore was one of the wealthiest men in the world. He had everything that could be bought: private jets, vintage cars, and a mansion that stretched wider than most hotels. But none of it mattered anymore. Since the death of his wife, Helena, life had lost its meaning. Helena had died only weeks after giving birth to Ava, taken by an aggressive form of cancer no one had detected in time. That single event had shattered Alexander in ways even he didn't understand. He continued to live inside the same enormous house, but it had turned into a grave of memories. Every hallway echoed. Every wall held a framed photograph of Helena smiling, a reminder of everything he could no longer touch. He buried himself in business and medical philanthropy, investing millions into cancer research as if money could rewrite fate. He met with scientists, funded labs, and signed checks until his hands trembled. But nothing filled the hole she left behind. Each night when he walked through the dim halls, he felt her absence like a physical weight. Ava had inherited her mother's dark eyes and delicate smile, but also the same illness. It had appeared early, a quiet shadow on her medical reports that grew darker each month. The treatments were endless: injections, machines, radiation, blood tests. Her life was a rotation of hospital beds and sterile rooms. The man overseeing her care was Dr. Julian Cross, a respected physician, famous for his calm precision. He did his best to keep her comfortable, but the truth was cruel. Ava was tired. She didn't understand why her small body kept hurting, or why she spent so much time hooked to wires. She often cried silently, the kind of tears that never reached her voice. Alexander watched her from the background like a ghost, present yet distant. He wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, but his grief had numbed him. He didn't know how to be a father anymore. Every time he looked at her, he saw Helena's face, and it broke him all over again. The Whitmore Estate was a masterpiece of architecture: marble floors, towering glass walls, and silver chandeliers, but it was lifeless. The air felt heavy. The staff moved quietly, performing tasks with mechanical precision: meals prepared, rooms cleaned, schedules followed. Yet beneath the perfection, there was emptiness. The housekeeper said once, "This place has no heartbeat anymore." And she was right. Alexander's nights were the hardest. He would walk down the silent corridors until he reached Ava's room, where the faint rhythm of machines filled the darkness. He would stand there for hours, watching her chest rise and fall, his reflection caught in the window beside her bed. He never spoke. He just watched. He often wondered if this was punishment for failing to save Helena, for believing that money could fight death. The thought haunted him. At St. Helena Medical Center, the doctors fought to manage Ava's condition. The treatment slowed the illness but didn't cure it. Dr. Cross gave frequent updates, but his tone was always careful, always measured. "We're making progress," he'd say. But Alexander had learned to hear the silence beneath those words, the unspoken truth that time was running out. Despite everything, Ava had a spark. She was gentle, curious, and brave in her quiet way. She liked drawing pictures of birds she saw outside her hospital window and coloring them in uneven shades of blue and green. The nurses adored her spirit, but it was fading. The pain made her small voice weaker each week. Back at the mansion, Alexander spent his days locked in his office. Stacks of medical reports covered his desk. Sometimes he would stare at them without reading. The papers blurred together until they looked like fog. The house's routine had become mechanical. Doctors visiting, nurses changing shifts, cleaners passing silently through hallways. Everything worked, yet nothing lived. Even the sound of laughter had vanished years ago. The mansion had become a museum of loss, grand, spotless, and dead. One evening, as the sun melted behind the estate's massive glass windows, Alexander stood at Helena's portrait in the living room. The golden frame caught the dying light. He whispered, "I'm trying, Helena. I'm trying." But the echo that returned was only his own voice. He had spent years pouring wealth into research, hoping for redemption. Yet deep inside he knew he wasn't saving anyone. He was only delaying the inevitable. When the last medical team left, he was forced to hire new help, someone who could manage Ava's day-to-day care at home. The agencies sent profiles, trained, efficient, emotionless. But one file stood out, Sophia Lane. No background of wealth, no notable experience, just a short note. Reliable, gentle, understands children. When she arrived, she didn't talk much. She simply nodded, listened carefully, and began her work. Her presence was quiet, so quiet it felt like the house was breathing differently. Alexander barely looked at her. He gave short instructions, said, "Thank you," and left the room. He thought she'd last a week at most. He was wrong. Within days, Sophia began to notice things, tiny things. How Ava's breathing calmed when someone hummed nearby. How her hands stopped trembling when someone stayed close. She didn't speak much to the nurses, but she was always there, in the corner, folding linens or adjusting pillows, and Ava noticed her too. For the first time in months, the child's eyes followed someone around the room. That was the beginning, the smallest moment of connection inside a house that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Sophia Lane moved through the Whitmore Estate like a whisper. Soft steps, steady eyes, hands that never hurried. She spoke only when necessary, yet her presence began to change the rhythm of the house. Where silence once felt heavy, it now felt alive, like the pause before something hopeful. In the beginning, she did exactly what was expected. She cleaned, organized, followed instructions from the medical team. But she watched, always watched. She learned how the nurses operated when Alexander appeared, how the staff avoided looking into Ava's room for too long. The mansion was efficient but soulless, run like a business more than a home. Sophia didn't try to fix that. She simply began existing differently inside it. During Ava's treatments, she sat quietly by the window, folding tiny towels or rearranging the flowers on the nightstand. She didn't speak to fill the air. She just stayed close. It took days for Ava to look at her directly, and when she finally did, it was brief. Just a glance. But it was enough. Over time, Sophia started humming soft tunes, lullabies without words. The nurses noticed how Ava's heart rate steadied when Sophia was near. The machines beeped slower, calmer. Even Dr. Cross mentioned it once, half smiling. "You seem to have an effect on her, Miss Lane." Sophia only nodded. She didn't see it as anything special. She simply cared. One night, she found a storybook in the corner of Ava's room. A faded children's book Helena had once read aloud. Its pages were worn, corners soft from use. Sophia picked it up and began to read quietly, unsure if the girl was awake. Ava listened. She didn't move or respond, but her eyes stayed open, following the rhythm of Sophia's voice. By the time the last page turned, the girl had fallen asleep, her small hand clutching the blanket. It became their ritual. Every night after the nurses left, Sophia would sit beside her and read. Sometimes fairy tales, sometimes poems. Ava never asked for anything specific, but one evening, just as Sophia closed the book, the child whispered, "Can you read it again?" Sophia froze for a second. It was the first thing Ava had said in weeks. Her voice was weak but clear. She smiled softly and opened the book again, reading every word with care, pointing at the pictures as she went. That small moment stayed with her long after Ava drifted to sleep. Alexander noticed, though he pretended not to. From his office he sometimes heard faint laughter or the quiet rise of a lullaby. It unsettled him. The sounds were too gentle, too alive for a house built around silence. He would stand by the doorway, watching Sophia's shadow move around Ava's bed, her presence calm and certain. He didn't interfere. He couldn't, but deep down he felt something unfamiliar, jealousy perhaps. Or maybe guilt. Sophia was doing what he hadn't been able to do for years, bring life back into this place. Sophia continued her routine with quiet discipline. She never overstepped, never sought attention. She simply gave Ava what no one else could, presence without pity. When treatments left Ava weak, Sophia helped her stretch her legs, whispering, "Just one more step, sweetheart." Her voice carried neither demand nor fear, only belief. And Ava, fragile but determined, obeyed. Within days there were subtle changes. Ava smiled more. She stayed awake longer. Her eyes no longer drifted aimlessly. Even her nurses began to notice. "She's stronger this week," one remarked. Maybe the medication's finally helping, but Sophia knew. It wasn't the medicine, it was something simpler. Human warmth. Alexander began spending more time in the hallway outside Ava's room. He never entered while Sophia was there, but he watched through the half-open door. He saw Ava reaching for Sophia's hand, her expression calm, trusting. It stirred something inside him, a longing he hadn't felt since Helena's death. At dinner one night, he caught himself glancing toward the staircase, half expecting to hear Helena's laughter echoing again. Instead, he heard Ava giggling softly upstairs. It hit him harder than any loss had before. Sophia never spoke to him beyond polite exchanges. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. Dinner's ready. Ava's asleep." That was all. But even those words began to sound like an anchor in his hollow life. He began noticing things, how she arranged Ava's toys in a perfect circle, how she kept fresh flowers in the girls' room every morning, how she moved through the mansion without making a sound. She was like air, unseen but essential. Still, he resisted the urge to thank her. Gratitude felt dangerous. It would mean acknowledging how much he needed someone again, and Alexander Whitmore didn't need anyone. Or so he told himself. The truth was, the mansion itself had started to change. Light entered differently. The cold silver walls that once reflected emptiness now carried warmth from Ava's laughter. The staff began greeting each other in the hallways again. Even the housekeeper, once stoic, began humming along with Sophia's tunes. But with that change came fear, the fear of losing it all again. Alexander found himself retreating back into his office late at night, staring at Helena's portrait. "You'd like her," he whispered. "She reminds me of you." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was truth. Sophia, on the other hand, felt the growing tension too. She had started this job expecting routine, not attachment. Yet now, every time Ava smiled at her or clung to her arm, Sophia felt something stir in her chest, a fragile tenderness she hadn't felt in years. She knew she wasn't family, but it didn't matter. She had become something else, something words didn't quite capture. Ava began drawing again. Her favorite picture showed a woman standing beside a small girl under a blue sky. When Dr. Cross asked who they were, Ava replied softly, "That's me and Sophia." Alexander heard it from the nurse later that day. He didn't say anything, just turned away, hiding a tear that fell before he could stop it. Sophia's presence had done something money never could. It had made his daughter feel safe. One evening, after Ava had finally fallen asleep, Alexander lingered outside her room longer than usual. Sophia turned, startled, when she saw him standing there. "She smiled today," he said quietly. Sophia nodded. "She's trying her best." There was a pause between them, heavy but gentle. For a moment, it felt like Helena's memory stood somewhere between them, unseen yet present. "Thank you," he whispered, before walking away. It was the first time he had said those words in years. Sophia stood in the hallway, staring after him. The mansion lights flickered softly against the marble floors, and for a fleeting second, she felt like the house itself was breathing again. Neither of them knew it yet. But the small changes, the smiles, the books, the lullabies were only the beginning. The storm waiting ahead would tear their world apart. But for now, for the first time in years, hope had quietly entered the Whitmore Estate. The weeks that followed were filled with small miracles, ones too quiet for the world to notice, but loud enough for Sophia Lane to feel. Ava had begun speaking again in fragments, asking for her favorite story, pointing at the window when she saw a bird. The nurses called it progress. Sophia called it grace. But beneath the fragile improvement, the illness still lingered. It had grown clever, hiding behind good days and returning with vengeance when least expected. The doctors called it cycles. Sophia called it cruelty. Every morning the house carried two sounds, the chirp of birds outside and the dull hum of machines inside Ava's room. The child had grown thinner. Her voice trembled when she spoke. Yet even in pain her eyes searched for Sophia the moment she entered. Sophia learned every sign of her discomfort. The way Ava's hands twitched before nausea came. The way her breathing shortened before tears. She didn't need monitors or reports. Her instincts told her when something was wrong. Dr. Cross continued to manage the treatments with his usual calm, checking charts, adjusting medication. "The results are stable," he'd say, but Sophia noticed how stable began to sound like a lie. Ava wasn't getting better, just quieter. One grey afternoon, the procedure had been particularly harsh. The machines beeped faster, nurses moved quickly, and Ava's small body trembled as the injection went in. Sophia stood in the corner, clutching the hem of her apron, wanting to help, but unable to interfere. When it was over, everyone left the room except her. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and iron. Ava lay still, her eyes half open, lips pale. Sophia wiped the sweat from her forehead, whispering softly, "It's over, sweetheart." "You're safe now." Ava didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, her fingers weak. Sophia pulled the blanket closer and stayed seated beside her bed. Minutes passed in silence until Ava's hand moved slightly. Her fingers reached out, searching blindly until they found Sophia's. The grip was soft, trembling, but real. Sophia froze. Ava's eyes fluttered open, glassy with exhaustion. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mommy, promise you'll save me." The words pierced through Sophia like lightning. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. She wasn't Ava's mother. She wasn't even family. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Ava wasn't speaking to her mind. She was speaking to her heart. Sophia's throat tightened. She leaned closer, pressing Ava's fragile hand between her palms. "I promise," she whispered. "I'll take care of you. I promise it wasn't planned. It wasn't rational." But the words came out with the kind of truth that burns. Ava's eyes softened. Her grip loosened. Within moments she fell asleep again, the faint rhythm of her breath returning. Sophia sat frozen, tears rolling down her cheeks. That single moment, those 5 words, had altered everything. It was no longer just a job. It was a vow. She stayed beside Ava long after the nurses returned, pretending to organize supplies so she wouldn't have to leave. Her heart raced each time she looked at the child's face. She felt something inside her awaken, something fierce and unexplainable. When Alexander passed by the doorway that evening, he saw Sophia still seated beside the bed, her hand resting near Ava's. He didn't say a word, but something in that sight caught him off guard. The quiet determination in Sophia's posture reminded him of Helena, of how she used to sit by his side during long hospital nights, refusing to give up. For the first time in years, he looked at someone and saw hope instead of despair. Later that night, Sophia couldn't sleep. The promise she'd made echoed in her mind again and again. "Promise you'll save me." What did it mean to save someone who was dying? She wasn't a doctor, she couldn't cure disease, but she could stay. She could fight in the only way she knew how. Outside, the wind rustled through the gardens. The mansion lights were dim, but a faint glow spilled from Ava's room. Sophia stood by the doorway, watching the girl sleep, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the soft beeping of machines. Sophia had been many things in her life. Maid, caretaker, outsider, but never someone's promise. The weight of it terrified her and comforted her at once. From that night forward, she changed. Her duties stayed the same, but her purpose shifted. Every action became deliberate. Each towel folded, each meal prepared, each word spoken. She carried that vow like a heartbeat. When the nurses arrived the next morning, they found Sophia already awake, fixing Ava's blanket and writing notes about her medication schedule. One nurse smiled. "You're here earlier than usual." Sophia replied quietly, "She needs me." Ava began to sense it too. Even when pain blurred her thoughts, she always looked for Sophia first. Sometimes she'd whisper, "Stay with me." Other times she'd just hold her hand in silence. Sophia never let go. Alexander noticed how the atmosphere of the mansion changed again. The emptiness that once hung over the halls had softened. He didn't understand it fully. He only knew that every time he passed Ava's door, he could hear gentle laughter. It made him pause. One evening he stepped closer to listen. Inside, Sophia was reading another book, something about a lion and a girl who healed him with kindness. Ava giggled faintly when Sophia changed her voice to sound like the lion. Alexander's eyes glistened. It had been so long since he'd heard that sound. Sophia finished the story and turned off the bedside lamp. "Good night, my brave girl," she whispered. Ava's eyelids fluttered, her lips forming a tired smile. "Good night, Sophia." When Alexander walked back to his office, he sat down heavily at his desk, hands trembling. He realized that for the first time since Helena's death, there was life in his home again. He opened an old drawer and took out a faded photograph of Helena holding newborn Ava. "She looks like you," he whispered, "and she's finally smiling again." That night, he didn't walk through the house aimlessly as usual. He stayed in his study, listening faintly to the sound of Sophia's footsteps upstairs. Meanwhile, Sophia sat by the window in her small room at the far end of the estate. The moonlight spilled across her notebook, where she had written one sentence again and again: "I promised I would save her." The pages were smudged with tears. In the silence, she pressed her hand over her heart and whispered, "I won't fail her." She didn't know yet how dangerous that promise would become, or how far it would lead her into the dark. But one thing was certain. For the first time in her life, she had something worth breaking the rules for, and from that night onward, the Whitmore Estate was no longer just a house. It had become the place where a single promise, spoken by a dying child and kept by a quiet maid, would soon unravel the lies of an empire. Sophia Lane had made a promise, a simple one spoken in a trembling whisper beside a sick child, but each passing day made it feel heavier. She began noticing details others ignored. The way Ava's color changed after certain injections. The way her heart rate spiked right after specific medications. It started small. Just coincidences, she told herself. But coincidences began forming patterns, and patterns began whispering warnings. One morning, after a particularly rough treatment, Ava's skin turned ghostly pale. Her breathing grew shallow, and her pulse weakened. Dr. Cross called it a temporary reaction, assuring everyone it would pass. But Sophia saw the way his eyes flickered to the nurse preparing the next dose. Something wasn't right. That night, she started writing things down: dates, times, symptoms. She hid the notebook inside the pocket of her apron. At first, she only wanted to remember what had happened, but by the end of the week, she had pages filled with connections that didn't make sense. The same medication, always marked with a silver label and faint blue seal, seemed to trigger Ava's worst reactions. Sophia asked one of the nurses quietly, "This medicine, it's different from last week's, isn't it?" The nurse looked up sharply, her smile practiced. "It's the same brand, Miss Lane. Everything is according to protocol." Her voice was polite, but her tone was final. Sophia nodded, pretending to accept the answer, but she didn't believe it. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she went to the trash bin outside Ava's room. She rummaged through discarded packaging and found one of the silver-labeled boxes. The print read Genexis Biotech. Sophia frowned. The name meant nothing to her, but something about it unsettled her. The next morning, she approached Alexander in his office. He was buried in paperwork, the glow from his monitor casting harsh light across his face. "Mr. Whitmore," she began cautiously, "the new medication, where is it coming from?" He didn't look up. "From Genexis Biotech. They're one of the pharmaceutical companies I fund." "Why?" Sophia hesitated. "It's just, every time she receives their injection, her condition worsens." Alexander sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sophia, I appreciate your concern, but this is advanced medicine, beyond our understanding. Dr. Cross oversees everything personally. You don't have to worry." She wanted to argue, but didn't. His voice was tired, defensive, the voice of a man too broken to face another loss. When she left his office, her chest felt heavy. He wouldn't believe her, not yet. Over the next few days, Sophia began paying closer attention to the deliveries. The medication boxes arrived late at night, always in unmarked vans. 2 men in company uniforms brought them inside without a word. The staff avoided eye contact when she asked questions. One night, curiosity won over fear. Sophia stayed awake, hiding behind the kitchen curtains. At midnight, headlights swept across the driveway. The same black van pulled up. The men carried crates through the back entrance. She moved closer to the window and caught the logo glinting in the moonlight. Genexis Biotech. Her heart thudded in her chest. She whispered to herself, "Why are they bringing new boxes when the old ones aren't even empty?" The next morning she asked one of the housemaids about the deliveries. The woman lowered her voice. "Don't question it, Sophia. It all goes through Mr. Whitmore and Dr. Cross. We just follow orders." Sophia smiled faintly, but inside she felt cold. Something about this was wrong, too quiet, too hidden. That evening, she checked the medicine cabinet in Ava's room when the nurses left. The vials looked identical, but when she compared them carefully, she noticed tiny variations in the printed codes. Some numbers didn't match the treatment logs she'd seen before. She opened Ava's medical file to double-check and found more inconsistencies. The listed dosage didn't match what was being given. The batch numbers were different. Her hands trembled as she turned each page. None of it aligned. She wanted to tell someone, anyone, but who could she trust? The staff seemed indifferent, and Dr. Cross's smile had begun to feel hollow. That night, as Ava slept, Sophia sat by the window under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. She flipped through her notebook, comparing her notes with the medication records she'd copied. The patterns were undeniable now. Every major decline in Ava's condition followed the silver-labeled injections. Sophia leaned back in her chair, her chest tightening. "This isn't medicine," she whispered. "It's something else." She didn't know what to do, but she knew she couldn't stay silent. When she finally slept, her dreams were restless. Images of Helena's smiling portrait, Ava's fragile hands, and the faint blue logo of Genexis Biotech burning through the dark. The next morning, as she served breakfast, she overheard 2 nurses talking quietly in the hallway. "They're increasing her dosage again." Sophia froze, pretending to clean a tray. One nurse noticed her and lowered her voice further, whispering, "Just follow orders. Don't ask questions." Sophia's pulse quickened. She walked away before they could notice her eavesdropping. Later that day, she confronted Dr. Cross gently as he reviewed charts near Ava's bed. "Doctor, I've noticed the dosage keeps changing. Is it safe?" He didn't even glance up. "Miss Lane, I appreciate your attention, but you're not trained for this. Let me handle the medical side. Your focus should be on her comfort." His tone was polite, but there was an edge beneath it, a warning. Sophia stepped back. "Of course, doctor." But her mind was racing. That night, she stayed in Ava's room long after everyone left. She looked at the sleeping child, so small, so fragile, and thought of her promise. "I'll save you." Sophia opened her notebook again and drew a small symbol next to every time the silver-labeled medication appeared. The pages filled quickly. The more she looked, the more it made sense, and the more terrifying it became. She whispered to herself, what if she isn't sick from the disease anymore? What if it's the medicine itself? Her breath caught. For the first time, she considered something darker, something no one wanted to believe. What if Ava wasn't just dying from illness? What if someone was making her worse? The thought chilled her to the bone. In the stillness of that night, Sophia looked down at the sleeping child and made a decision. She would find out what Genexus Biotech really was, and what it had done to the Whitmore family, no matter who tried to stop her. Sophia Lane could no longer silence the voice inside her. The pieces she'd been collecting, wrong dosages, mismatched serial numbers, evasive answers, had formed a picture too grim to ignore. But she knew she couldn't expose it alone. She needed help, someone who could reach beyond the mansion's walls. That was when she thought of Natalie Reeves. They had grown up in the same small town years ago, two girls with big hearts and quiet dreams. Natalie had built a reputation as one of the most honest administrators at St. Helena Medical Center, known for catching errors others overlooked. Sophia hadn't spoken to her in years, but trust was something you never forgot. One morning, while Ava was asleep, Sophia called her. Her voice trembled as she explained what she'd seen. The changing medications, the name Genexus Biotech, the strange deliveries in the night. Natalie didn't interrupt. She just listened. When Sophia finished, there was silence on the other end. Finally, Natalie said softly, "If what you're saying is true, Sophia, this isn't just a mistake. You're talking about something very serious. Meet me, but not here. And be careful who you tell." Sophia agreed. A few days later, she visited St. Helena Medical Center under the pretense of dropping off paperwork for Ava's upcoming tests. Natalie met her in a small administrative office tucked behind the main corridor. The blinds were half closed, the air tense. "I've already started looking," Natalie said quietly, locking the door. "Some of the medications in Ava's file don't match the hospital's supply records." Sophia frowned. "You mean they're not from here?" Natalie shook her head. "They're listed under something called a special authorization program. It's rarely used, mostly for experimental drugs under emergency exceptions. But in Ava's case," she turned the monitor towards Sophia, "it's far more complicated." On the screen were two patient records, Ava Whitmore and another name Sophia didn't recognize. But the lab results were identical. Every number, every test value, exactly the same. Sophia's stomach turned. "That's not possible." Natalie nodded grimly. "No, it's not. It means someone's copying or manipulating data." She clicked through more files, her brow furrowing deeper. "Look here," she whispered, opening a list of prescriptions tied to Ava's ID. "Some of these aren't part of any approved treatment for her condition. The codes are off, and the batch numbers belong to discontinued trials." Sophia leaned closer. "So what does that mean?" Natalie hesitated. "It means someone's using her case to test unapproved drugs, possibly without authorization." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. She backed away, shaking her head. "That can't be right. Mr. Whitmore funds hospitals. He would never allow something like this." Natalie's voice softened. "I know you want to believe that, but look at this." She opened another file, older this time, archived under a different name, Helena Whitmore. Sophia froze. That's her mother. The records were incomplete, but one thing was clear. Helena's medical treatment had also been linked to Genexus Biotech. Trial numbers matched the ones on Ava's current medications. A line of text at the bottom sent chills through Sophia's body. Hereditary continuation study. Subject H. Whitmore, A. Whitmore. Sophia whispered. They continued the same experiment. Through her daughter. Natalie didn't speak for a long time. She clicked open one more file marked Trial 02, H. Whitmore. Inside were scanned medical notes, dosage charts, and at the very end, Helena's digital signature authorizing treatment participation. But something was wrong. Natalie zoomed in. Comparing the signature with an old consent form from Helena's pre-diagnosis records. Sophia, this doesn't match. Sophia leaned closer. The loops, the slant of the letters, it was different. It's forged, Natalie said. Someone faked her consent. Helena never agreed to this. Sophia's pulse hammered. So she didn't just die from the illness. She was part of an experiment. Natalie nodded. And Ava's continuing it. The room felt suffocating. Sophia pressed a hand to her mouth. My God, Natalie scrolled further down. There's more. Look at the fine print. Genexus had a contract with the hospital for data collection through direct genetic lineage. That means if the original patient died, the trial could continue using any living blood relative. Sophia could barely process the words. You're saying they're using Ava as a lab subject? Natalie's voice broke. Yes, and they're doing it under the guise of treatment. The silence that followed was unbearable. Sophia felt her legs trembling. Every memory of Ava's suffering, every unexplained fever, every injection, it all made sense now. They're hurting her, she whispered. And they did the same to her mother. Natalie reached for her arm. Sophia, listen to me. If this is true, you're dealing with something far bigger than a hospital error. Genexus is powerful. They have money, influence, and connections everywhere. If they know you've seen this, I don't care, Sophia interrupted. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were steady. She asked me to save her. I made a promise. Natalie's eyes softened. Then we'll do this carefully. You can't confront them yet. Collect proof. I'll back you from here, but keep your head down. No one can know you've been in these files. Sophia nodded slowly. As she left the hospital, her thoughts spun like storm winds. The sunlight outside felt too bright, too harsh. Each step echoed with a single truth. The illness that had destroyed Helena and was now consuming Ava wasn't nature. It was manipulation. Back at the estate, she moved through the halls like a ghost. Her every glance felt watched. Dr. Cross greeted her with his usual calm, but now she noticed the slight tension behind his smile. That night, when she sat beside Ava's bed, she looked at the child differently, not as a patient, but as someone caught in a cruel experiment disguised as care. She brushed a strand of hair from Ava's forehead and whispered, "They won't touch you again, I promise." Ava stirred in her sleep, her small hand searching for Sophia's. Their fingers met. Sophia's tears fell silently. Upstairs, Alexander worked late in his office, unaware that the foundation of everything he believed, his wife's death, his daughter's treatment, the medical empire he funded, was built on lies. Downstairs, the maid he barely noticed had uncovered the first crack in that illusion, and soon that crack would split their world in two. Sophia Lane didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the open folder Natalie had given her. The evidence was undeniable: duplicated data, forged consent forms, and a company name that had haunted the Whitmores for years. Genexus Biotech. She thought of Helena, signing forms she never agreed to, of Ava, receiving drugs disguised as hope. Her stomach twisted at the thought. By dawn, her decision was made. she would tell Alexander. When she entered his office that morning, he was seated behind his grand mahogany desk, papers scattered across the surface. He looked exhausted, older somehow. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, clutching the folder, "I need to show you something important." He glanced up briefly. "Is it about Ava's schedule?" "No," she said, voice trembling. "It's about her treatments, and your wife's." That caught his attention. He frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Go on." Sophia stepped forward, placing the folder in front of him. "I went through the medical records with someone I trust. Natalie Reeves. She's a hospital administrator. We found that Ava's prescriptions don't match her official files. Some of the medications aren't approved for her diagnosis, and they're from a company called Genexis Biotech, the same one that handled Helena's treatments before she died." Alexander blinked slowly, confused. "Genexis? That's one of the firms I support. They produce cancer medication." Sophia nodded. "Yes, but these aren't standard medications. They're experimental. The records show both Helena and Ava were part of an unapproved trial, without consent." For a long time, Alexander said nothing. His face remained unreadable, but his fingers tightened around the edge of his desk. "That's impossible," he said finally, his voice low. Sophia opened the folder, pointing to the documents. "Please, look at these. The data was copied. The signatures don't match. Helena's approval form, someone forged it. And Ava's case is listed as a continuation of her trial." Alexander's eyes scanned the pages, his face draining of color. "You're saying my wife and now my daughter were used as test subjects?" His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Sophia swallowed hard. "Yes." For a few seconds there was only silence. Then Alexander pushed back from his desk so abruptly that the chair struck the wall. "Do you have any idea what you're accusing me of?" He snapped. "I've funded hospitals. I've done everything possible to save my family. And now you're suggesting I let this happen?" Sophia flinched. "I'm not accusing you, sir. I'm trying to protect Ava." But he wasn't listening. His anger was too raw, too desperate. "You're just a caretaker. You have no idea how the medical world works." "Maybe I don't," she said quietly, "but I know when something's wrong." The tension in the air was suffocating. Then Alexander pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Have Dr. Cross come to my office immediately." Within minutes the doctor arrived, calm as always, adjusting his cufflinks before stepping forward. "You called for me?" Alexander threw the folder across the desk. "Explain this." Dr. Cross glanced at the papers, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, he smiled, a small, practiced smile that made Sophia's blood run cold. "Ah," he said softly, "I see what's happened here." "What's happened?" Alexander said sharply. "Is that my maid is telling me my daughter and my wife were part of some kind of drug trial." Dr. Cross chuckled lightly, the sound deliberate. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Lane has simply misunderstood. These are standard research documents, nothing illegal. The duplicated results are likely clerical errors. Data often gets mirrored across patient IDs in our system." He turned to Sophia, his tone dripping with condescension. "You mean well, Miss Lane, but you've overstepped." "This isn't your field." Sophia's hands clenched into fists. "I know what I saw, Doctor. Natalie Reeves verified the inconsistencies herself." Dr. Cross's smile didn't falter. "I know Natalie. She's an excellent administrator, but not qualified to interpret trial data. These are complex reports, easy for outsiders to misread." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, torn between fury and confusion. "So you're saying there's nothing wrong?" "Nothing at all," Dr. Cross said smoothly. "Your wife's and daughter's cases are unique. These records simply reflect the complexities of their treatments. I'd advise Miss Lane to focus on her duties rather than hospital documentation." Sophia stared at him, her heart pounding. Every word he spoke sounded rehearsed, deliberate. Alexander looked at her then, eyes hollow, tired. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I think you've done enough." She shook her head. "Please, sir, just listen. Don't involve yourself in medical matters again," he interrupted. "That's not your place." His tone wasn't cruel, it was broken. But the effect was the same. Sophia's chest tightened. "I understand," she whispered. When she left the office, she felt hollow. All her courage, all her effort had crumbled under calm deception. Later that afternoon, she saw Dr. Cross leaving the estate. He walked past her with a polite nod, his briefcase clasped tightly. She could feel the quiet warning in his eyes. That evening, Natalie tried calling her. Alexander refused to take the call. Sophia sat alone in the corridor, staring at Ava's closed door. Inside, the machines hummed, the air thick with antiseptic and sadness. She felt invisible again, like all the truth in the world meant nothing against money and power. But when she walked into Ava's room that night, everything changed. The child lay asleep, her breathing uneven. Sophia brushed her hair gently. "Remembering the promise," she whispered. "They can silence me, but I won't stop." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't know it yet. But that night would mark the turning point. Within hours, things would spiral out of control, because when Genexis couldn't silence suspicion, they'd do what they always did, hide it under more suffering, and the next injection was already on its way. That night a storm swept over the Whitmore Estate. Thunder rolled across the hills, rain drumming against the tall windows as if trying to break its way inside. Ava's room glowed dimly under the soft pulse of medical lights, her small frame trembling against the sheets. The nurse had just given her a new injection, the silver-labeled vial from Genexis Biotech. Sophia had tried to protest, but Dr. Cross's orders had been firm, and Alexander's silence had sealed it. Within an hour, Ava's breathing changed. It grew shallow, uneven, her lips paling to a faint blue. "Something's wrong," Sophia whispered, rushing to her side. "Ava, look at me." The child's eyes flickered weakly. Her fingers twitched, searching for Sophia's hand. "It hurts," she gasped. Panic filled the room. The nurse called for Dr. Cross, while Sophia held Ava's trembling hand against her chest. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "You promised me once, remember? Now I promise you I won't let you go." Dr. Cross entered moments later, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. "Step back," he ordered. He gave precise instructions to the nurse, his tone sharp but composed. They worked quickly. Oxygen mask, new IV line, monitor adjustments. Sophia stood frozen, her mind racing, her body shaking. She wanted to scream, to stop them, but she had no authority here, just a promise. Alexander appeared in the doorway, pale and speechless. He watched his daughter convulse as the machines screamed warnings. For the first time in years, his power meant nothing. Minutes crawled by like hours. Then Ava's breathing steadied. Weak but steady. The crisis had passed, leaving the room in stunned silence. Dr. Cross turned to Alexander. "She's stable for now. These things happen with children in her condition." Sophia felt rage rise like fire. "No," she said, voice trembling. "This happened because of that drug. You've seen what it does." Dr. Cross shot her a cold look. "Miss Lane, I suggest you leave the room. You're emotional and obstructing treatment." Alexander hesitated, then nodded faintly. "Sophia, please go." She stared at him in disbelief, tears stinging her eyes. But she obeyed. Outside, the hall felt endless and cold. The rain hammered harder against the glass as she leaned against the wall, gasping for air. She couldn't trust anyone. Not the doctor, not the system, not even Alexander anymore. When the mansion finally fell silent that night, Sophia returned to Ava's room. The girl was asleep, her face pale under the faint glow of the monitors. Sophia sat beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'll fix this. I don't care what it takes." Her mind replayed every red flag, every late-night delivery, every strange label, every evasion. This wasn't care. It was cruelty wrapped in science. As dawn approached, Sophia wandered through the darkened mansion, unable to rest. The storm had passed, leaving a damp quiet behind. She entered Alexander's office to clean, but her movements were mechanical. Then something strange caught her eye. A wooden panel on the bookshelf, slightly uneven. She reached out. It moved under her hand. Curiosity turned to dread as she pulled it open. Behind it sat a small metal safe. Her heart pounded. She looked around. The house was silent. On Alexander's desk sat an old photograph of Helena and Ava. Tucked behind the frame was a faded slip of paper with 6 numbers scribbled across it. Her trembling fingers dialed them into the safe. A click. The door creaked open. Inside were papers, contracts, medical letters, signed agreements between Alexander Whitmore and Genexis Biotech. Sophia's breath caught as she skimmed them. Payments, trial codes, research authorizations. It was all there. But what stopped her cold were the letters underneath, a bundle tied with a thin ribbon, Helena's handwriting across the top. Sophia's vision blurred as she unfolded the first one. Helena's words poured from the page. Fear, confusion, distrust. She wrote of doctors changing her medication without explanation, of overheard conversations about data collection. She suspected her treatment wasn't about saving her at all, but about studying her. Each letter grew more desperate. In the last one, dated days before her death, Helena's handwriting trembled. "If I don't survive, please protect our daughter. Don't let them continue what they started in me." Sophia pressed the letter to her chest, tears falling freely. Helena had known. She had tried to warn someone, but the letters had been hidden away. She turned to leave, but froze. Alexander stood in the doorway, pale, stunned. His eyes moved from the open safe to the letters in her hands. For a moment, neither spoke. Sophia didn't hide the papers. She simply held them out. Alexander stepped forward slowly, his gaze fixed on Helena's handwriting. He took one letter, unfolding it with shaking hands. His breath hitched as he read the final lines. "Please protect our daughter from the same fate." His voice broke when he whispered, "She never gave me these." Sophia believed him instantly. She saw it in his eyes, the shock, the guilt, the unbearable grief. He sank into his chair, clutching the papers. "They used her," he whispered. "And now they're using Ava." Sophia said nothing. She just stood there, the truth between them heavy as the morning light creeping through the curtains. For the first time, Alexander Whitmore saw the world exactly as Sophia had, corrupted, cold, and built on the suffering of those he loved most. And from that moment, the billionaire stopped being a man of control. He became a father ready to burn the system that stole his family. Alexander Whitmore didn't sleep after reading Helena's letters. He sat in silence through the early hours of morning, the papers spread before him like ghosts on his desk. Every sentence cut deeper than the last. "Protect our daughter from the same fate." By sunrise, his decision was made. He walked into St. Helena Medical Center without an appointment, his usual confidence stripped down to raw fury. He requested a private meeting with Dr. Cross. The staff, seeing his expression, didn't dare refuse. In a small consultation room, Dr. Cross arrived minutes later, calm and unbothered as always. He adjusted his glasses and smiled faintly. "Alexander, I wasn't expecting—" Alexander threw the folder on the table. "Explain this." Dr. Cross looked at the documents, Helena's forged consent forms, the Genexis contracts, the payments labeled as research support. His expression didn't change. "These are not official records," he said after a pause. "Where did you get them?" "That doesn't matter," Alexander snapped. "Tell me if they're real." Cross leaned back. "You're walking into dangerous territory, my friend. Those are confidential documents, and if you continue down this path, I'll have no choice but to take legal action for defamation, for interfering with treatment, and for putting your daughter's life at risk." Alexander's jaw clenched. "You think threats will stop me?" Dr. Cross stood up slowly, straightening his coat. "If you want Ava to live," he said softly, "stop digging. Let the doctors do their job." Then he walked out, leaving Alexander staring at the door, trembling with rage. That same night, Sophia noticed a black sedan parked across the street from the Whitmore Estate. It stayed there for hours, engine off, headlights dim. The next night, it was there again. At first, she thought it was coincidence. But when it followed her to the pharmacy 2 days later, her heart began to race. She told Alexander. For once, he didn't question her. He simply nodded, his voice low. "I've seen it too." He ordered the estate's security to double patrols and installed cameras at every entrance. But both knew that whatever was coming, no gate could keep it out. Meanwhile, Natalie Reeves began receiving messages on her phone, short anonymous texts. "Stop looking into Genexis. This is bigger than you. We know where you work." The last one mentioned her family by name. She called Sophia in a whisper. "They're watching us. Don't trust anyone outside the house." Sophia's grip tightened around the phone. "I won't stop, Natalie." "I can't." "Then be smart," Natalie said. "We need to move carefully." But caution no longer mattered. 2 days later, Dr. Cross called Alexander with a new proposal. "Ava's case is deteriorating," he said. "We need to transfer her to a special research unit with better equipment." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face when she overheard the conversation. "What unit?" she demanded. Dr. Cross smiled faintly. "Avalon Research Facility. They handle our most complex cases." Natalie did some digging that night. When she called Sophia back, her voice shook. "That facility doesn't exist in any public record. It's a front, registered under Genexis Biotech. No public contact, no patient reviews, nothing. If they take Ava there, you may never see her again." Sophia repeated every word to Alexander. He stood silent for a long time before whispering, "They're trying to erase everything." It was the first time his voice carried fear. Not for his reputation, but for his daughter. From that moment, everything changed. He stopped being the distant man locked in grief. He called Natalie himself, gathered every document, every letter, every copy Sophia had kept hidden. Together, they built a case. Sophia organized Helena's notes and the hospital records. Natalie began backing up files and encrypting data. Alexander called a lawyer from another city, explaining only that he needed protection, fast. But time wasn't on their side. That night, Ava had another crisis. Sophia was the first to notice, the slight tremor in Ava's fingers, the shallow breaths. The machines beeped frantically. The nurse rushed in, preparing another dose of medication, the same silver-labeled vial. "No!" Sophia shouted, grabbing the nurse's wrist. "Not that one." Dr. Cross appeared at the door almost instantly, as if waiting. "What are you doing?" Sophia's voice shook with fury. "That drug is killing her. I won't let you touch her again." Alexander entered seconds later, eyes blazing. He looked from Sophia to the trembling nurse, then at the tray of vials. For a moment, the entire room froze. Then he said, quietly but firmly, "Hold the treatment." Dr. Cross turned to him, shocked. "Alexander, if you interfere, no more," Alexander said. "Not until I understand what's going on." The nurse hesitated, lowering the syringe. Sophia's knees almost gave out from relief. Ava's breathing steadied. It was a small victory, but in that moment, Sophia felt the first spark of real hope. Later, as the storm clouds gathered again outside, the three of them, Alexander, Sophia, and Natalie on speakerphone, sat in his office surrounded by papers and evidence. They had finally become a team. They knew what they were fighting now, and they also knew that Genexis wouldn't let them go quietly. The decision came the following morning. No more secrets. No more waiting. Alexander Whitmore, Sophia Lane, and Natalie Reeves gathered everything they had: documents, letters, forged consent forms, hospital data, Helena's handwriting, and prepared to do the one thing Genexis feared most: expose them. Natalie contacted someone she trusted, Ethan Clark, an investigative journalist known for unraveling corruption buried deep inside powerful industries. He had exposed politicians, pharmaceutical companies, and even hospitals before. If anyone could bring the truth to light, it was him. When Sophia spoke to him over the phone, her voice was steady. "We have evidence of unauthorized medical trials on patients, including a child." Ethan's tone sharpened immediately. "You have documents?" "Yes. Proof that Genexis Biotech has been testing unapproved drugs on wealthy families under the guise of treatment." He agreed to meet that evening. They chose a quiet cafe far from the hospital. The Blue Finch, its back tables dimly lit and secluded. The three of them arrived first. Ethan came shortly after, trenchcoat dusted with rain, notebook already in hand. Sophia placed the evidence on the table, one piece at a time. Contracts, screenshots, Helena's final letter. He read in silence for nearly 20 minutes, his expression tightening with each page. When he finally looked up, his voice was grave. "This will shake the system, Sophia, but you have to understand, once I publish this, there's no going back. Genexis will fight. They'll dig into your lives. Are you ready for that?" Sophia didn't hesitate. They already took everything from this family. "We're ready." Ethan nodded, closing his notebook. "Then I'll make sure the world hears the truth." Within 48 hours, the first article went live. Hidden Trials: How Genexis Biotech Used Private Patients as Human Test Subjects. The story hit every major news outlet within hours. Screens lit up across the country with Helena's letters, redacted contracts, and photos of the Whitmore family. Hashtags spread faster than wildfire. At St. Helena Medical Center, panic erupted. Administrators scrambled to contain the damage, releasing statements filled with denial and legal jargon. But it was too late. Public outrage exploded. People demanded accountability. Protesters gathered outside hospital gates holding signs that read, "Patients, not experiments," and "Justice for Helena and Ava." Sophia watched the chaos unfold from the estate, her phone buzzing non-stop. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers wanted statements. But all she cared about was Ava, asleep upstairs, her chest rising softly under the glow of safe, monitored light. Then came the first major breakthrough. Ethan's second article revealed that Dr. Julian Cross had attempted to flee the country hours after the story broke. Airport authorities stopped him at the private terminal. He carried several vials of unregistered medication and encrypted hard drives filled with patient data. When investigators searched his home, they found signed contracts linking him directly to Genexis Biotech, proof he had been an active partner in unauthorized drug trials. The arrest made headlines worldwide. Doctor at Center of Illegal Trials caught attempting to flee. Sophia and Alexander watched the news together in silence. He sat on the couch, Helena's final letter trembling in his hands. "She tried to warn us," he whispered. Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder. "You heard her, Mr. Whitmore. You protected Ava. You kept the promise." But even with Dr. Cross gone, the storm didn't stop. Federal investigators entered St. Helena Medical Center with court orders, seizing files, computers, and medical samples. The hospital's board was suspended. Genexis's stock plummeted overnight. Natalie called that evening, her voice trembling with relief and exhaustion. "It's all coming out, Sophia. Dozens of cases. Families who never knew they were part of these trials. Helena and Ava weren't alone." Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, her hand pressed to her chest. "Then we did it," she said softly. "We finally did it." But she didn't feel victory. Not yet. Only a deep, aching sorrow for every name buried behind a data file. Outside the Whitmore Estate, journalists gathered behind gates, cameras flashing. The mansion that once hid behind silence had become a symbol of truth. Alexander stood at the front steps the next morning, facing the crowd for the first time. Sophia stood beside him, Ava in a wheelchair wrapped in a soft white blanket, the flashing lights reflected in his eyes as he began to speak. "My family was deceived," he said calmly, voice steady despite the storm of cameras. "My wife died believing she was being helped. My daughter was almost taken the same way. No amount of wealth can shield you from cruelty disguised as care. But today we stand here, not as victims, but as a warning." He paused, looking down at Ava, then at Sophia. "They took our trust and turned it into profit. But they can't take our truth." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted questions, but all Sophia heard was Ava's small whisper beside her. "You kept your promise." Her eyes filled with tears. She squeezed Ava's hand, nodding silently. That day, across every network and headline, the Whitmore name no longer stood for wealth. It stood for justice. And somewhere, far from the chaos, the people who once profited from silence realized their empire was beginning to crumble. Months passed. The noise faded. The protests slowed, and the world slowly turned its gaze to new headlines. But inside the Whitmore Estate, life was quietly being rebuilt. The investigation into Genex's biotech uncovered a web of deceit stretching across continents. Executives were charged, licenses revoked, and new laws proposed to prevent such abuses from ever happening again. Yet for Alexander, Sophia, Natalie, and especially Ava, the victory wasn't in courtrooms or news articles. It was in the small, ordinary moments that returned to them. Piece by fragile piece, Ava was healing. Her new doctors at Redwood Children's Hospital had confirmed what Sophia and Natalie had suspected all along. The previous treatments had worsened her condition. The Genexis drugs had been toxic, but under honest care, Ava began to recover. Her color returned, her laughter came back, and her strength grew with every passing week. She still needed therapy and gentle treatment, but for the first time in years, her prognosis was hopeful. Sophia stayed by her side through it all. She helped Ava learn to walk again, to draw, to play. Every giggle felt like sunlight. Alexander visited daily, sitting with his daughter for hours. Sometimes they didn't speak. They didn't need to. He would simply hold her hand, his expression soft, his eyes no longer haunted. At the estate, the staff who had once moved like shadows now spoke freely, laughing softly as they worked. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. The walls that once carried grief now carried warmth. One afternoon, Ava surprised Sophia with a drawing, 3 figures standing under a tree, Daddy, Sophia, and me. When she showed it to Alexander, he smiled for the first time in years. A real, human smile. "I thought we lost everything," he said quietly. "But maybe this was the beginning." Sophia didn't answer. She just smiled. A few months later, Alexander announced the creation of the Helena Whitmore Foundation for Ethical Medicine. It was more than a memorial, it was a declaration. The foundation would fund transparent clinical research, offer support to families affected by unethical trials, and advocate for patient rights. Natalie became its director of administration, using her experience to guide its legal and medical framework. Sophia was offered a permanent role, not as a maid, but as an advisor on patient care and emotional recovery. She accepted without hesitation. The opening ceremony took place in a modest auditorium filled with doctors, journalists, and families. Alexander stood on stage, holding a folder that contained Helena's letters. His voice wavered, but his words carried strength. "My wife believed that medicine should heal, not exploit," he said. "Her final wish was for our daughter to live free from what destroyed her. Today, that wish continues through this foundation, and through the courage of those who refuse to stay silent." He turned to Sophia, who stood beside Ava, tears in her eyes. "This woman kept a promise I was too blind to see. She gave my daughter not just life, but hope." The room erupted in applause. Then Ava, dressed in a pale blue dress, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was small but clear. "She promised she would save me," she said softly. And she did. Sophia covered her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her. The crowd stood and clapped louder, some crying openly. In that moment, every battle, every sleepless night, every tear, it all felt worth it. After the ceremony, Alexander, Sophia and Natalie stood outside the building, watching Ava play with other children on the grass. The sun was bright, the air gentle. For once there was no shadow chasing them. She would be proud, Alexander said quietly. Sophia nodded. She already is, Natalie smiled. You both gave her legacy a heartbeat. They stood there in silence for a long time, three people who had started as strangers, now bound by truth, loss, and something greater, love rebuilt from ruin. That evening, back at the estate, the photographs of Helena still lined the walls, but now, instead of sorrow, they brought peace. Ava often stopped in front of them, whispering, "Good night, Mommy," before heading upstairs. Sophia watched her climb the staircase with steady steps, strong, free, alive. Later, Alexander found Sophia on the terrace overlooking the garden. The night was calm, the stars soft above the city lights. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "You don't need to," she replied. "Ava's smile is enough." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Helena once told me that real strength isn't about wealth or knowledge. It's about faith in something pure. I didn't understand it until now." Sophia turned toward him. She was right. Below them, Ava laughed, chasing fireflies under the glow of the garden lamps. It was a sound neither of them would ever forget, and for the first time since Helena's death, the Whitmore Estate no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive. It felt like home. The past had left scars, but it had also carved a truth no one could erase. Sometimes, salvation doesn't come from science or money or power. It comes from a promise whispered by someone who simply refuses to give up. And that brings us to the end of this story. A journey through pain, truth, and the kind of courage that changes everything. If this story moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Tell us what part hit you the hardest, or what moment you'll remember most. Your comments mean more than you think. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.